Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's digital event. We are excited to have the team from i2Soft joining us again today for a dive into the mastering of ForestIvy and ForestPack9, a complete guide to growing climbing plants in 3ds Max. My name is Kelsey Colbenschlag. I'm the Sales Operations Manager here at ArcVision. I'm joined today with Corey Rubidoux, CEO, and Sam Anderson, Technical Marketing Manager. She'll be is doing some of the work with me on the background through the event. We have today Paul Roberts, Training Manager for i2Soft, and Jaime Parga, Marketing Manager for i2Soft. Just a little bit about today. We will have a presentation led by Paul Roberts, followed by our Q&A session. We have the chat open, so please feel free to put any questions that you have along the way into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. During the presentation today, Paul is going to give us a great overview of ForestIvy, covering some of the basics as he goes, and sharing some of the key features of not only with ForestIvy, but with ForestPack9. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
So yeah, thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, we're from i2 Software, and I'm going to be talking about ForestPack9 today, but also wanted to mention a few other things that we are responsible for. So as well as ForestPack, our second big plugin is, of course, RailClone, which is a parametric modeling tool for 3D Studio Max. It's quite an exciting tool that works by creating rule sets that allow you to distribute kind of modular pieces of geometry that you can go back and edit at any point. And the whole thing is easy to update and efficient and really worth checking out if you've never looked at it. Alongside ForestPack and RailClone, we also have two library collections, the 3D Garden, which is assets for ForestPack, and the Parametric Library, which are assets for RailClone. This is actually our second time we've been on one of these events. We were on a few months back, actually, and before ForestPack9 was released. But at the time, we were able to share a little bit about this. But we wanted to come back and go a little bit more into detail now that the final version is out. And so I wanted to say a little bit more about how ForestPack9 came about, because it is a slight change of direction for us. So this is the 25th year of ForestPack being on the market. In fact, it's been an incredible journey really to get to this point, and we're really proud of this 25 years. But of course, what happens when you reach a landmark about like this is you start to think, well, what do we want the next 25 years to look like? And so what we started to do is look at what we've done over the past two and a half decades, yeah. And what we realized is that ForestPack isn't just one plugin anymore. It's not just a scattering plugin, although it is mainly a scattering plugin, which here I've just called Forest Scatter. But around that has grown an ecosystem of other tools for 3D Studio Max. So we've got a library browser in there as well, which is pretty fully featured. And we've got Forest Lister, which allows you to kind of use this listing interface to organize your scenes. We've got Forest LOD in there, which allows you to optimize scenes by, like any LOD system, scattering lower poly for objects further from the camera, or maybe reduce the quality of materials further from the camera where they're not counted. More recently, we've got ForestSet, which is a kind of container object that you can use with ForestPack that allows you to put lots of objects into containers and then plug those into various bits of ForestPack. And then Forest Tools, which allows you to basically export objects made with ForestPack to other pieces of software, DCCs, real-time engines, and that kind of thing. So it's evolved, and what we realized was, well, actually, yeah, this is the future of ForestPack. ForestPack is a suite of tools, everything you need to create amazing landscapes. And so for the next phase of ForestPack, for ForestPack9, what else can we add to this existing list? And what we came up with was ForestIvy, because there wasn't a particularly great Ivy generating plugin for 3ds Max. There had been some earlier ones that were using sort of free off-the-shelf algorithms, but we wanted to go a little bit further and create our own algorithm for growing Ivy, which is both realistic looking but also fast and really easy to edit and iterate on, so you can work in real time more or less and get the look that you're after. And what I want to do today is to go over ForestIvy, probably the majority of the session, going over ForestIvy, starting from, well, really in three phases, I would say. I think anyone starting something like ForestIvy, one of our plugins, probably goes through three phases of mastering the tool. And the first phase really is just using the presets. So you would just get started, load up a preset and apply it to a surface. So I want to show you that first of all. And then you might want to then go a little bit deeper and start to modify those presets. So I want to explain how or what all the settings in ForestIvy mean so that you have a good understanding of how you might tweak the look of these ivies to suit the particular style you're going for. And then based on the back of that, the final kind of level of mastery, if you like, is to create a new climbing plant from scratch. And so the second two will roll together because they're basically about understanding the parameters. On top of that, if there's time at the end, I might just show you a couple of things to do with ForestPack9, specifically some features that make scattering on balconies a lot easier with ForestPack. So what is ForestIvy, first of all? So it is a new ivy growing plugin which attempts to balance artistic control with a natural growing algorithm. So we're trying to balance the needs of the artist to control where the ivy grows with the efficiency of then letting the computer do some of the work. And what you can see here is that it works based on strokes, right? So you draw an initial ivy stroke to control the initial growth. And then on top of that, you've got a growth level, which allows you to basically tell ForestIvy how much of this design you want to give over to the computer algorithm. Lower numbers will allow you to really draw very specifically exactly where you want the ivy. Higher numbers will allow the algorithm to take over and grow that ivy on the object. So, excuse me, that is kind of the starting point for this. So this is how you would start going with that. So I'm just going to hop into 3ds Max and show you how you would use a preset to quickly draw some ivy on this pergola. So it's very easy to use. On the left-hand side over here, we've got a taskbar, and you can see here there's a new ForestIvy button. So we just click on that there and just draw a ForestIvy icon in the scene. You then come to the modify panel, and here you can see it's not too daunting in terms of rollouts. There's just a few rollouts here that you need to know if you're just going to use the presets. And mainly this is going to be in the growth setting and in the general rollout here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to load a preset from the library. So we just pop the library open like this, and you can see here we've got all the presets that ship with ForestPack. So I'm just going to pick, let's pick Bougainvillea here and just load that up like so. So it'll just take a few seconds to load that up. And now I've got that loaded, I need to tell ForestIvy what surfaces that I want it to be able to grow on. And you do that by coming into the growth rollout here into the surface objects section here. And all you do is simply click on the plus button and just pick an object from the scene that you're going to want to draw on. And you could pick multiple objects. So you can see it's stayed lit up, the plus button. So I could pick multiples if I wanted to. You can also click multiple objects from the scene by clicking on this little button here, select multiple objects by name, which brings up a picker. So you can see here I've got the pergola selected, so I could pick more here if I wanted. And the X button does what you'd imagine and deletes the current selection. So once you've got that done, you basically click on the paint baseline button here, and then you can just draw on that object, and you can see I'm starting to draw my ivy, or in this case, it's Bougainvillea. Like so. And you can see there's a little bit of additional growth, but not too much. You can also delete lines by clicking on the delete baseline. So this will just delete lines like that. Or you can bin the whole thing, but we'll just draw that back for now. So once you've drawn your baseline, you've got the basic idea of when you want the ivy to go. All you need to do is to increase this setting here, which is growth level. And this basically tells ForestIvy how many branches off of this main branch to continue to grow for. So if I increase this, you'll see it gets bigger and bigger. And then really that's it. The nice thing is, like I say, this is real time, so you can kind of just keep painting even with high growth levels, and it updates pretty quickly given that it's creating thousands and thousands and thousands of leaves and flowers. So that's pretty powerful. The other thing you've got here that you might be interested in is the option to use a percentage of the baseline. So what you can do is to reduce the percentage of the baseline, the original baseline that's used, and it will start to shrink back along the baseline, which can be useful for animation and things like that, but we won't worry too much about that right now. So the other thing I wanted to mention, because really that's it, that's how easy ForestIvy is to use if you're using the presets, is that at any point you can go in and change a preset without having to redraw the baseline or reassign the surface objects. So if I'd drawn this and I was happy with it more or less, but I wanted to change the species, then what I would do is to come into the library again and, sorry, just forgive me, I put a silly growth level in there. There we go. Just come into the library again and just swap it easily enough. So I could change it for roses, for example. And it'll just swap without me having to redraw anything. Like so. So that's all pretty straightforward. I hope you'll agree. Now, another thing I wanted to mention about growth is that you often want to control which bits of an object that you're actually growing on. And so if I can just pick this ForestIvy object. And so here, for example, you can see that the window has the ForestIvy growing over it. This always happens when you're doing something live, doesn't it? You just can't select it. There we go. There we go. So obviously this is one object, but it's got multiple material IDs to which the materials are assigned. So let's see if we can find them. If I limit this by material ID 1, what do we get? Just the window by the looks of it. 2, nothing at all. 3, aha. 3 would appear to be the cladding itself. So here you can see I've limited the ivy growing to just the cladding, and now I've excluded the window. You have got another option here, which is the exclude option underneath. And what that basically does is it flips this material ID from an include to an exclude thing. So if I clicked on exclude there, you can see now I've only got it growing on the window, but maybe I want to change it to 4, which I think is possibly the glass. I can't remember exactly. Yeah. So you can see I'm basically able to exclude various bits of the scene just by changing the material ID here. So this is a really straightforward way of limiting your ivy growth using probably attributes of the object you've already assigned, like material IDs. So I think you can see that's going to really speed things along. So that's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot more really to say about using ForestIvy using the presets. It really is that simple. But what I want to get into and what we'll spend more time on is how to use the settings in ForestIvy so that you can customize and create your own Ivy presets. So let's just come out of this. And over here, I've got some bits and bobs that we can start to use. So this will be creating your own climbing plants. And what I've got here is just the only assets you need to start creative climbing plants. So there's not much you need in order to get started. I've just got a few leaf variations, and this could be from an existing vendor like Megascans, or maybe you've scanned your own, and some flowers too. The only thing to mention about this is that these are aligned along the x-axis, so they're facing along the x-axis there. So and the other thing is that the pivots for those are put to the base of the stem, obviously. So that's where they're going to connect to the branches. So that's the only thing you really need to know about those. Other than that, fairly straightforward. And I've got a wall in order to grow them on. So what I'm going to do first of all is talk about the branch settings. Okay, before we get into the leaves and the flowers, talk about the branch settings. And if you're creating a ForestIvy from scratch, what you would do is start in exactly the same way as if you're using a preset. Just draw a ForestIvy item in the scene, switch to the modify panel, and then I'm going to pick a surface object, in this case the wall, and I'm going to draw my first baseline, something like that. Okay, so that's my baseline there. Now, if I come into the branches rollout here, this is a fairly straightforward rollout, which you can just see here. And you can see there's just a few settings: width, sides, material ID, and UV double channel. So the branches are relatively straightforward. It's mostly to do with configuring the geometry and how they're going to be textured. So the most important thing here is the width, probably. So that's going to allow you to change the thickness of those branches. So now we can see them, look, like so. And then the number of sides. So if I get in here, you can see the number of sides is just around here. So I've got it set to 5 at the moment. And to be honest, I mostly leave it on 5. It's very seldom that we get this close to our ivy and really need to see it in detail. But if you did, you can obviously increase the density of that there. You can choose the material ID you're going to use to assign materials to it from here. And you can choose how this UV W unwraps. So I've got this set to UV channel 1 and I'm using real world map size. But if you didn't want to, you can tick that off and change the size there manually. So that's pretty straightforward for branches, the actual meshing of the branches. But what I also wanted to talk about a little bit is how the growth setting and the segments and things like this along the length of the spline are determined. What are the settings that determine those? Okay, so first of all, we've got this growth setting. I mentioned that is the number of branches coming off of the initial branch. And a branch is anywhere between where it's spurred off from and the next fork here. Okay, so if I just change this branching probability value to 100%, so every one of these intersections forks, you can see this works here. I've got a growth level of 4, and I've got basically 1, 2, 3, 4 different branches, sub branches, if you like, coming off of this initial branch. So that's how that works. So I've got 4. And if I increase them, then obviously what's going to happen is I'm going to get more branches coming out there. That's how that works. How is the length of each branch controlled? That is controlled by the length setting here. And you can see this has got 2 values here, which is a minimum and a maximum. So in order that the ivy looks natural, obviously each branch length is going to be slightly different. And if I increase that, you'll see, even though I'm not adding any more growth levels, so no more actual branches, you'll see that the ivy will get bigger because I'm increasing the size of each section of the branch before it bifurcates. So that's how that works there. And then in terms of how kind of smooth it is, how many edge loops there are on there, that is determined by this segments value here. So this is currently set to 3, so there's not a whole lot of subdivisions going on along there. But if I change that to something like 7, you can see I've now got a lot more subdivisions between each bifurcation there. So that's kind of how that works. But it's useful to know that, because when you're trying to work out how big you want your ivy to be, how much wall you want it to cover, you can basically think, well, okay, it's basically this growth value here, which is currently 4, multiplied by the length value will give you the minimum and maximum reach of your branches off of the ivy stem. So this is 4 times 5 here, so that's going to be 20 centimeters minimum, and 20 times 4, there's 80 centimeters maximum. That gives you a sense of how big that can possibly be there. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense. And the other thing I wanted to mention here as well is the angle of the branching. So you can see the branching going on here. Every time it gets to a fork, it branches in both directions. How is that determined? Well, it's determined by this setting just over here, the branching angle option. And you can see it's got an A and a B, and it's got a minimum and a maximum. So what do those mean? Well, I think the minimum and the maximum is probably fairly obvious. You've got a minimum and a maximum branch angle, but A and B is perhaps less obvious. And what that is either side of the branch. So you've got A, for example, which will be the left-hand branch on any fork, and then you've got B, which will be the right hand. You can basically separate them out. So you can have you can have a left-leaning plant or a right-leaning plant, or you can have them the same. So we can change this a little bit. Maybe we can widen this out a little bit. It's growing quite a linear way. So we can maybe change the maximum to, say, 50, and you'll see that this starts to spread out a bit, and maybe the minimum goes a bit higher too, to 35. And you can see it's spreading out across the wall more. And this is sort of how easy it is to start designing the look of your plants, if you like. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense. You've also got a symmetrical option there, which removes the need to enter the values twice in the A and B setting. In this case, it just takes the A value, so you don't need to worry too much about that. Now, on top of that, you've also got branch noise. So you can notice in one branch section, it's not a straight line, it's a little bit wiggly, and that's caused by this branch noise value, which is here, and against a minimum and a maximum value. So we can, if you wanted a noisier piece of geometry, you can just turn that way up and turn maybe the minimum up a little bit too, and it looks like a bit more gnarled and curvy. But it's just something you can play with, like so. So that's sort of how the basic branch layout works. But it's not really the climbing algorithm as such. This is just how the branch, the size of it and how it separates into pieces. The actual growth algorithm is controlled with only very few parameters that are quite easy to understand, I think. So let's just take a look at those. If we come down to the section of the interface down here, the main sort of settings here are the climbing value here and the check ground hit and death on ground hit value. So both these values are controlling the branches that are climbing on the wall, that are stuck on the wall, these two values. And that's really all you need to know in order to control the branches that are stuck on the wall. And it's fairly straightforward. The climbing value, the more you increase it, the branches will tend to climb in a more linear fashion up the wall, and you can see it's closing in until it's really trying to ascend the wall in quite a tight pattern. Whereas if I reduce that value, you'll see they spread out quite a lot more. And if I take it down to 0, like I'm doing now, you can see they're more or less just going out sideways. And in fact, you can take that into negatives and you can have them start to climb down the wall if you go into negative values. So that's kind of pretty much how the climbing parameter works. And if I just increase this growth level a little bit more so that I'm going down into the ground, you can see what's happening when it hits the ground plane. It doesn't continue below the ground plane. It's basically going down there. Actually, it's climbing round the bottom of the of the wall, in fact, in this case. But if I turn on check ground hit, then what happens is it does detect the ground plane and it starts to grow out across the floor instead. So that's what's happening there. Maybe this will be clearer perhaps if I just lower this wall a little bit. So I'll just take that down a little bit like so. And yeah, we can see what's going on a bit more. Okay, so what you can now do is to control what percentage of these branches are removed when it hits the ground. So if I turn up this death on ground hit percentage, you can see I can remove the branches that intersect the ground. At 100%, they're all gone. At 0%, none are gone. And obviously, the percentage is something in between if you want something a bit more random. So those really do control quite easily how that works, the growth algorithm. Not tons of parameters, which is good because it's nice and easy to understand. Basically, climbing is one easy to understand parameter, and it determines how much the plant either grows up to the sky or down to the ground. And then if it's on the ground, how many do you cut off at that point? Now, of course, that's not really an accurate description of exactly what ivies do. Not all of the branches stay glued to the wall. And so the next set of parameters basically allows you to control how many branches flip off of the wall. And this set is just down here. This is the, sorry, let me just highlight this a bit better. The adhesion and the adhesion distance value. So just two values here will determine how many of these branches leave the wall. And one is a percentage of the number of branches that can possibly leave the wall. And the other one is the distance that a branch checks to see if it's near the wall. And so logically, what's going to happen is that if I turn the adhesion value down, more branches will come off of the wall. And so as this value goes lower, I should start to see more branches starting, you can see at the top here, some more branches starting to detach. And again, you can take this into negative values and start pushing objects from the wall as well. But let's take it up a little bit higher. And then the adhesion distance value, the lower that is, the more likely branches are to come off the wall as well. So you can see I'm starting to get branches off the wall there. Now the lower that is. So that's fairly straightforward too. So once a branch is off of the wall, because it's become detached, the climbing value no longer affects it because it's not a climbing branch, it's a hanging branch. And in this case, what controls the angle of these branches is gravity. And so over here again, we've got our gravity parameter, which is fairly straightforward. Basically, the higher that value, the more likely a branch is to be pulled down to the ground, like so. Or if you want branches that look more like they're growing up towards the sky or growing towards the sun, then you can take that gravity value and make it a negative value, and then you'll feel like they're pulling up towards the sky like that. So that's sort of how that works, really. Pretty straightforward. If you are using displacement on your wall, then you've also got a surface offset value there so that you can compensate for any displacement that you've got off the wall. So for example, if we had a displacement of 1 centimeter, we can just pop 1 centimeter in there. And you can see it just pushes that off the wall ever so slightly. The hanging branches also have a control, a bit like depth on ground here. The hanging branches have a depth distance parameter here, which determines when that branch gets cut off, like basically how long can that branch be hanging off the wall before it gets trimmed. And that is a minimum and a maximum value there too. And so the higher that is, the longer the hanging branches can be there. So you can see they're getting a bit longer. And if I shrink this value on both the minimum and the maximum, you can see the hanging branches are starting to be trimmed. So that sort of works together with the hanging branches, like so. So that gives you a lot of controls for taming that algorithm, if you like. And that's pretty much all of them. And I don't think any of them are particularly challenging to understand. I think you can do quite a lot with those. And obviously, it's just spending a bit of time tweaking them. Let's just take the growth level down a little bit now, like so. Good. So the next thing I wanted to look at was none of these, in fact, was adding leaves to this and also the materials. So the ForestIvy, unlike ForestPack, doesn't pick up the materials off of the base objects. You have to create a multi-sub object material and assign it manually. And so if I just remind myself of this, the leaves are on material ID 2, the flowers, I believe, on material ID 3, which means the branch will have to be on some other material ID from those. I think I've got it set to 1, as I recall. Yep, got it 1 there. And so what I need is a material that will work with that. So here's my material browser. I've already got this set up, actually. You can see I've got stems there. I've got the leaves there and the flowers there. So all I need to do is to create a multi-sub object material that matches that. Into material ID 1, this one into 2, and this one here into 3. And then assign that to the ForestIvy object directly. So it's fairly straightforward, basically. It saves a lot of worrying about where the materials are being hosted and that kind of thing. Once you've got that, we get to a new rollout for the leaves and flowers, which is this one here. And there are 2 list boxes in this. The first one is for models. So this is the leaves and the flowers. You would just add them all to a list here. Now, this doesn't do anything if you add them here. They don't appear on the branches or anything like that, because what they need to be is assigned to this layers box here. So what you would do is bring in all your models, leaves, flowers, thorns, fruit, whatever, then create a layer for each category of model that you want. So here we will create leaves and flowers, for example. And that's pretty much how that works. So what you can do is either click on the plus button and add them one at a time, or click on the multi-picker button here and just select them like that. So I can bring in flowers and leaves. Add them like so. Okay, so they're all in there, but like I say, nothing's showing up on the vine yet because we haven't added a layer. So what we need to do is to add a new layer here by clicking this plus button. I'm just going to give it a name because we want to organize our scenes nicely. And we need to tell this layer which models to use. There is a models option here and there's an assign button. So I just click on that. And here you can see I've got a list of all the models and I can pick which ones to use for this layer. And all you do is check the boxes, basically. So let's just come in and check the boxes here for the leaves and hit OK. You can then set a distance. And there they go. Set a distance to control how many leaves are distributed along these branches. So what you've basically got is a minimum and a maximum distance there. These are just measured along the branch. And at the moment, I'm getting a leaf every roughly 10 centimeters. But if I change the minimum to 5 centimeters, for example, I'm now going to get a leaf every 5 to 10 centimeters. So that's fairly straightforward. And you can see that I'm getting a mixture of the of all the leaves that I put in this assignment box here. So one thing I wanted to mention is that these leaves can be controlled using probability. So for example, I've got 100% probability on everything at the moment. So I'm getting, you know, a completely equal mix of these. But let's say I wanted this to be more autumnal climbing plant. If I turn the green leaves down, for example, and then hit OK, then I might just need to force a rebuild just by tweaking a parameter. Now you can see that I've got a higher probability of yellow leaves there, and I've got a more autumnal climbing plant. If I switch to the opposite, which is probably what I'm going to have this time, I'm just going to change the yellow leaves to 5% and everything else to 100%. Then I'm just going to get the occasional dead leaf, which is probably what you'd want to do even for a healthy new plant. And then I'll just force a rebuild again like that. Okay. So you can see I've got loads of leaves on there now, maybe too many. So what I can do is to come into this next parameter down, which is called density. And what this does is it just whittles away at the leaves you've created, because the minimum and the maximum value is going to create a fairly regular distribution, even with the variation. But what you can do with the density is to start to randomly remove leaves from that distribution. So if I reduce that, you can see that I can start to randomly remove some leaves if I want to. Like so, I might just change this to 6 and 8, or maybe 8 and 12. Let's just open it up a bit. There we go. Great. And another thing that I wanted to mention here to do with density is that you can control the density based on the distance from the ground. So at the moment, you can see there's an equal density from top to bottom, but often climbing plants have a less dense, less or fewer leaves at the base of the plant and more leaves at the top where there's more available light. And so you can see we've got some settings over here, density fall off, which allows you to do that. And it's basically measured from the bottom. So if we said 50 centimeters, for example, or maybe a little bit more, you can see that I can start to reduce the density of the leaves near the bottom of the plant like so. So fairly straightforward. Now, in terms of how these leaves align to the branches, let's see if I can find somewhere like here. Yeah. Then, well, actually, let's jump down before I do that. Let's change to mode here. So there's a mode here called, which is currently set to single. And what this does is determines how the leaves grow out of the stem, how the leaves grow out of the branch. So at the moment it's single, which means you've got one leaf coming out one side of the branch. A little bit hard to see with all the chaos. Let me turn the density up again a little bit, see if I can get some more. So yeah, here, for example, you can see I've got one leaf coming out the same side of the branch each time. Now I've got some other options here. So I can also change to alternating. So now what I'll get is branch leaves alternating on either side of the branch. So one here, one here, one here, one here. And you can also do double. So that means that everywhere a leaf grows, you get one on each side of the branch, one on both sides of the branch. So all those are options, and that's going to really depend on your plant type you're creating. I'm going to go for alternate at the moment. And then maybe reduce the minimum and maximum value again to create some more. So in terms of alignment, so we've got like basically how do they grow out the branch, but in terms of how they're aligned, we've got an option here for this too, which is alignment. And what it's doing at the moment is coming out perpendicular to the branch. So you can see they're coming out top and bottom, straight out 90 degrees. You've got some other options. So you can come out the branch normal, which will mean they come sort of straight out of the branch, sticking straight out from the wall and also into the wall. So it just changes the alignment by 90 degrees, basically. And you've also got branch direction, which means the leaves follow the flow of the branches. So they're following the flow of the branches now. In this case, I generally leave it on perpendicular for leaves because they come out either side. And in a minute, I'll talk about end leaves where you've got separate settings for those. So far, so good. But what I might want to do is add a little bit of randomization to these. And so what we can do is come down to the rotation settings down here, and you can see we've got the ability to rotate on the X, Y, and Z axis. And really importantly here, you've got these mirror settings, and I'll show you why they're so necessary. So if I change the X rotation, for example, you can see here It's just rotating along the x-axis. Nothing much to do there. I'll just enter an interesting minimum and maximum value just to get a bit of randomization. Now the y-axis, on the other hand, we'll rotate it around the branch. You can see it's kind of swinging around the whole branch, basically coming in towards the wall or pulling away from the wall towards perpendicular. And that's the y-axis in action here. Now, what's happening is that both leaves, no matter what side of the branch they're on, currently are going in the same direction. So if I pull one leaf away from the wall, the branches on the other side are going into the wall. And, and that is where the mirror options can be useful, because if I turn on Y here, basically what happens is that I can now, by using a negative value, helps if I use the right axis, I can now pull both sides away from the wall to stop them from intersecting like that. So that's with the Y axis ticked, like so. This might be easy to see if I just change the mode to double, actually. So you can see if I've got a leaf on either side of the wall here, like these guys here, you can see they basically pull together in front of the wall or push apart into the wall. If I untick Y, you'll see they both rotate in the same way. So both have their uses, of course, but in this case, I want to make sure they're not intersecting the wall. So I'll just tick that on and pull them away. And then finally, it's the same thing with the Z-axis. So if I haven't got the Z-axis mirror ticked and I rotate, you'll see they swivel as though from a common point. And so if I wanted the idea of the branches growing in a V towards the direction of the branch growth, then I'd need to turn on Z mirroring here, and then I can pull them in that direction. And just fiddle with those two, just get them right. So fairly straightforward, lots of controls there for you. The other thing, of course, is we want to randomize the scale a little bit. So let's just randomize some fairly straightforward scale settings here, minimum and maximum value, and also by age. So you can reduce the size of the leaves the further along the branch they are. So we could change this to 60%, for example, and then maybe by age, like 60 centimeters. Let's try that. So you can see they're getting smaller as they get to the tips of the branch. So it creates just a much more natural distribution. Really, that's about it. That is all the settings you've got at your disposal for leaves. Again, it seems like I've gone through a lot, but they're all fairly self-explanatory, and there's not tons to learn once you've done it once. And you can certainly use these to modify your own our built-in presets, and then start to use them to create your own. I'll just go through it again very quickly to show you how the layer system works, because obviously what we want to do now is to add flowers to this as well. So what I would do basically for that is just to add another layer, go through this a bit quicker. You would give it a name, of course, assign your models. One thing I do like to do with flowers on these climbing plants is to, if you come down here, is that I've got a variety of numbers of flowers growing from a single pivot point. So I've got single flowers, but I've also got some clusters of flowers, and that'll give you a much more natural distribution if that suits your species, rather than loads and loads of single flowers. It just starts to look too regular and evenly spaced out. So you'll get a nice natural distribution with that. So, I mean, you can see that's kind of working already. I can control the number of flowers using the distance here if I wanted to. So for really dense flowering, you would take these numbers down really low, or for higher numbers, take them up higher. You can nibble away at it using the density settings, just like we did before. And you can change the alignment. Now here, I might change the alignment, because you can see at the moment with perpendicular, they're kind of growing sort of up the wall like that. But what I might do here is to change this to branch normal, so they come sort of straight out more a little bit. And then what you can do then is to use this setting here, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is called align to ground. And what that lets you do is to pull, it's a little bit like gravity basically, but for leaves and flowers. So if that's a positive value, it pulls them down towards the ground. And if it's a negative value, it pulls them up towards the sky. Now I'm going to bet that most flowers probably face upwards, in this case towards where the sun is, so I can pull them slightly up towards the sky like that using that value. And then of course you can randomize the rotation and scale if you want to. Just making up some values there really, and the scale too. to get a nice distribution. And yeah, and that's kind of pretty much set up. It's just you could add another layer of fruit if it had fruit or thorns or buds or anything else. You can just stack these up. There's no limit to how many layers you can have or how many objects you can assign to the different layers. I hope you can see that that's fairly straightforward to use. And then you can go back and change at any point. So I might, there's quite a lot of this stuck to the wall. Maybe I want to go back into growth and I want to detach a few things, so I can take my adhesion distance down maybe to 0.5 centimeters or something. You can see that's a lot more coming off the wall now. Maybe take the adhesion value down a little bit. So yeah, so I've got a sort of bushier distribution there. And another thing I wanted to mention is if I can find the end of one of these branches, so like here, for example, if I come into my flower layer, there is a separate setting here, which is called end leaf. And what this lets you do is to control the probability of an object being put right on the very end of the branches. You can see I've got leaves on the end at the moment, but not flowers on this particular one. And that's because my end leaf probability is set to 50%. So I'm only getting it, 50% of the time. If I wanted a flower on the end of every branch, I would just turn this up to 100%. And now you can see I've got some flowers on the end of the branch there. That's working great. And this has got its own separate alignment too. So I can change this to branch direction, for example, and then the flowers will follow the direction of the branch instead of coming out perpendicular. So you've just got that extra little bit of control just for the things that you plant on the end. And I might not, for example, want leaves on the end like I've got, or fewer of them. So I can go into the leaves layer, and in this case, maybe turn the end leaf probability down to 0 and get rid of those. I think that one is just about actually on the branch, but that's working nicely. So yeah, so I mean, that's sort of how you create your own preset. Obviously, you can come and fiddle with these as much as you want. But the nice thing is that once you've created this preset, you don't ever need to do it again because you can add it to the library. So what I can do is, once I've got this created, I can pop open the library browser here. And if I come into a new library, let's see, I've got one here somewhere already, my climbing plants. Then with it selected in the viewport, I can right click here and click import object from scene. And all I need to do is you can leave these as they are, these settings, pretty much. I might not create a material library, there's no need. But you do that if you wanted to support multiple renderers. And I might just increase the size of the thumbnail. But apart from that, I'll leave it as it is. Click import. Just give it a second just to bring that into the library. Okay, that's done. It's copied and repathed all the assets, so there's no need to worry about managing the textures and things. They've all been moved over. And now I've got that ready to use. So anytime I want to use that, I can just create a new ForestIvy object, come to the modify panel, open the library. I've already got it open here, but let's open the library, double click on it, and then assign your surface and draw. And you can see that I've got my preset there now that I can use anytime I open ForestIvy. So though it takes a little bit of time or a few minutes to create these things, once you've created them, I really suggest you save them to your library so that you can use them anytime, or they just act as the starting point for the next climbing plant that you create. Because realistically, you're probably not going to go through the same, probably not going to start from scratch every time. You're probably going to load an existing preset and then modify it, change the materials, change the models, and so on and so forth, rather than just do everything from scratch. Great. Wow. I don't know if there'll be any questions about any of that. Let's see at the end. I think I've got just 5 more minutes maybe just to cover one other ForestPack9 feature, or a couple more maybe in a different file. So let me open up this. So this scenario, we found people were trying to scatter or populate balconies using ForestPack. And what they had done is created like this. So they'd created splines for every balcony, and they were created in the same spline object. So these are all sub-splines in a single spline object. And here you can see I've used the array tool to create them. These are just as note as well, because we talked about rail clone at the beginning, but these splines are driving a rail clone object too. So the actual balcony geometry itself is also being driven by rail clone. So in the same set of splines. So you can see if I modify one of these, then it modifies all the geometry, which is where rail clone is really cool. So I just wanted to mention that quickly before I get into ForestPack. So let's say that I wanted to scatter all these objects randomly on the balconies. You can do that by just selecting them, clicking the ForestPack object. Here, I've got this populate from selection option on here, which basically means that I can save a bit of time adding them to the geometry list. And I will create this in generate mode. And all I should need to do is to click on that spline. Let's see if I can pick it. Here somewhere. Rectangle, there we go. So, okay, so you can see I've scattered some things on the spline there to fill the balconies. Now, there are a few problems which will become more evident as I start to change this distribution. So first of all, in the distribution settings, let's reduce the value so that I've got some more objects on those splines, like so. And really, I want to sort of calculate for the smallest objects here. So I just want to try and get that tightened up a little bit. So first thing is that loads of stuff is sticking through the railings themselves. So that's something we want to fix first of all. And this isn't a new feature. This is an old one. First thing you would want to do is to come into your areas rollout and distribution rollout. And at the bottom there's a collisions option. So just turn on collisions and then turn on preview and viewport if you want to see that in the viewports. So now you can see a little bit clearer what's going on. And you can see a lot of stuff has been removed now. So what you might need to do after you do that is to change the density setting a little bit more again. Now, what you'll obviously find as well is that some objects repeat too often. So you can see this, this umbrella here is showing up too many times. So what we can do is to come into the geometry rollout and find that object umbrella and lower its probability. So we can just have fewer of those if we want to. So another thing you want to do is to come into the areas rollout and change boundary checking to size. So that will stop stuff that intersects with the edges. I mentioned that a minute ago, but didn't do it. So you just want to change boundary check to size. And there you go. Now you've got stuff that is pretty much not overlapping and it is encompassed entirely within the splines. But here are the problems. You can see it's not really populating all of the splines. So, you know, these ones all over the place here, why have they not got anything on them? And that's because when ForestPack has a spline that has many sub-splines, it looks at it from above, basically, and it tries to work out which are the include and which are the exclude areas. So starting from the outside, you'd normally go include and then moving in, exclude, and then include and then exclude, and it keeps alternating as it moves in. If they're just slightly overlapping like this, you get the situation where it's trying to guess which one's an include and which one's an exclude. And in reality, we want them all to be include splines. We want them all to be used. And so what you can now do in ForestPack 9 is you can use one of these two options at the bottom here. So you've got these two new options, randomize stacked and separate subsplines. And we'll turn those both on, but separate subsplines first. That will basically force ForestPack to use every single one of those splines there. And now you can see every single balcony is populated. That's a very quick time saver. But there's another problem you can see, which is because of the way the distribution works in ForestPack, when an object is one above the other, they get the same randomized values. So you can see on this row here, for example, column of balconies, you can see you've got a tree and a chair and a chair. Exactly the same on each one, same on every single column, because they're more or less above one another. And so the fix for that is to click on the randomized stacked option, which is there, and then each individual balcony takes a separate randomized value. So very quickly with those two ticks, you've been able to randomly apply stuff to balconies, keep them within the parameters, within the boundaries, sorry. And that's a real time saver if you've got to populate these things. And while I'm here, there's one last thing I'll mention about ForestPack 9, which is the ability to quickly convert things to ForestSet. So for example, one thing I like to do, especially if I've wound up the density a little bit, is to add holes to the scatter by adding a empty object to the geometry list. So what I mean by that is I would add a new item to the geometry list by clicking on plus, and then instead of picking an object, I just set it to disabled. Now what happens is every time that object is randomly picked, it just creates a gap and nothing. And that can help to break up monotonous distribution patterns, especially in stacked splines. Now, if I want to control the probability of that, I'm going to have to select all of these different separate objects to control the probability of them. And I might not want to do that. So what you can do now instead to simplify that is I can select the ones that I want to control the probability for as a group, and then I can right click on it and I can click on move to ForestSet. So if I click on that, I basically convert that that group of 6 things into a single entry, and that makes controlling the probability for those so much easier. Where's it gone? ForestSet, there it is. So much easier. So I can easily dial that whole group of 4 things or 6 things, however many it was, up and down using a ForestSet. And the ForestSet is somewhere in the scene. There it is there, and it just contains a list of all of the objects that we created. And it's a simple thing, but it's just a big time saver. In the past, you'd have to have manually added those to a ForestSet, whereas now you can just click in here and do it very, very quickly. And I think probably I'm nearly out of time. Yeah, I think there's only just time for questions now. So I'm going to ask if there's any questions that I can answer. I know that was very fast, but hopefully it made some sort of sense, and you can see how useful and powerful this feature is. I did want to share one other thing actually, which is that ForestIvy is fully compatible with Forest Color, which is one of our other plugins that allows you to randomize and tint the textures on plants, and people use it in ForestPack a lot, but it works with Forest Color too. It's very simple to use. So here, for example, it's just randomly picking a green or a brown tint and applying that to a leaf texture. And it's a little bit hard to see streaming probably, but if you focus on kind of this area over here, you might see it. If I switch between a version without Forest Color and with, you can see now I've got a lot more randomized color if I switch between them on these leaves, which just helps bring that extra element of realism to your distributions. Okay, so let's see if there are any questions.
Oh, very, very impressive. This is, there's a lot to digest here, but I did have a question about when you're creating your presets, the leaves and the flowers, are those models that you have to create yourself, or did you get those from the library? Did I miss where those were sourced from?
So yeah, so if you're creating, obviously, if you when you're starting with ForestPack, it comes with 30 presets which have leaves and flowers and everything built in. So in that case, obviously they're built in. If you're creating your own climbing plants, it's assumed that you're creating something that isn't in the library. And so in that case, you would be probably sourcing your leaf models and flower models from somewhere else.
Got it.
Could be scanned stuff from Fab, or whatever it's called now.
Yep.
Or could be something you've modeled yourself or scanned yourself. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And you can obviously extract the existing leaves and flowers from our presets and build new presets from them if you want to. That's totally possible as well. So you can use the existing presets as a basis for your own and modify them and then save those to the library as new versions. But there isn't a separate library of flowers and leaves that aren't included in our existing presets.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Cool. Good. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yep. And then just as far as rendering these plants and all this stuff out, is I assume these materials that are put on here are all compatible with whatever renderer you have for 3 Studio Max. Is that right?
Yeah, so the presets come with excuse me, the presets come with materials for the major renderers. So Corona, V-Ray, the usual. In fact, if I come in here and just check, see what exactly it does support. ForestIvy climbing plants. So it should automatically select it, so you don't really need to think about it. But if you click down here, you can see which ones are supported, which is V-Ray, Corona Render, Arnold, and Physical for sort of everything else, if you like. And those will be automatically selected. If you're using something else, like F-Storm or something, not currently supported, then you would need to run a conversion on those, unless F-Storm supports the physical material. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, but we support them, the big 3, if you like.
So if you happen to switch between V-Ray and Corona on a project for one reason or another, everything that you place is just going to automatically get converted for you on the fly.
So in that case, you would need to reload the preset, because when you load it in, it loads in the materials for that renderer. But as I showed at the beginning, you can load the preset without having to reassign the areas the objects, the surfaces, sorry, or the initial growth splines.
Yep.
So it's not a massive deal to do that. But it doesn't currently, no, it doesn't auto detect. Once it's been loaded, it doesn't auto detect the renderer. Only when it's loading it does it detect the renderer.
Got it. Cool. And this is probably too detailed of a question, but I'll just ask: are there Mac scripting functionalities that are possible to tap into if you wanted to run some scripts and do some things for custom?
Yeah, I mean, but all of our plugins have certain elements of them exposed to MaxScript. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what is exposed in ForestIvy, and it hasn't been around long enough for me to get involved in that side of it. But I'm certain a lot of it will be exposed to MaxScript. Just that is the nature of things, and so probably let's have a look. If I adjust things, yeah. So you can see in the listener there, as I'm adjusting these things, you can see that we are all these values are exposed to MaxScript here, so that's completely scriptable. Any parameter in here seems to be scriptable.
Awesome. It's great to know. Cool.
Anything else?
I think we're good. I don't see any other questions at the moment. But we'll keep you guys in the loop if we get any along the way.
Cool.
Kelsey, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, just check the chat. No questions right now, but invite everybody, as Corey said, to please email us sales@arcvision.com if you have any afterwards. And to both of you all, thank you very much for joining us today. Amazing presentation, and we can't wait to schedule the next one.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
All right, cheers.
Bye.